What if your fatigue isn't failure, but resistance to a script that never belonged to you? You wake up, but something in you doesn't. The body moves, but the soul drags behind. You tell yourself you're lazy. You repeat it like a punishment. But deep down, you know it's not the whole truth. What you call laziness is often emotional paralysis. The weight you feel isn't from doing too little. It's from carrying too much of what was never yours. Dreams you didn't choose. Expectations you didn't create. A life that demands performance, not presence. You've been running from judgment, from shame, from the silence that keeps asking, is this really who I am? Carl Jung called it the persona, the false self you build to survive in a world that rewards masks more than souls. And the more you become what they want, the more you vanish. Until one day, getting out of bed feels like dragging a corpse. Not because you're weak, but because you've become a stranger to yourself. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That's what Jung said. But how do you become when you've spent your whole life pretending? Schopenhauer wrote, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves to be like other people. You gave up your essence to be accepted. You silenced your truth to be safe. You betrayed your own longing to fit into a mold designed by the blind. And now, you're tired. But not just physically. It's deeper. It's sacred. It's the body's rebellion against a role it never auditioned for. You're not failing to move forward. You're sinking under the weight of an identity that was handed to you, not born from you. That exhaustion in your bones, that numbness in your chest. It might be the final cry of a soul that's had enough of pretending. So ask yourself, gently, without shame, what if your exhaustion is sacred? What if this fatigue is not your enemy, but your last protest against a life that only wants your obedience, your productivity, your smile, but never your truth? You're not lazy, you're not broken, you're resisting. And sometimes resistance is the first breath of becoming real. There's a particular kind of guilt that lives in quiet people, the ones who look at their lives and feel nothing. You scroll through timelines filled with milestones, careers, weddings, announcements soaked in applause, and you try to convince yourself, this is what I should want too. But when you imagine it, it doesn't ignite you, it exhausts you. And then comes the shame. Not because you've failed, but because you can't seem to desire what everyone else praises. No one told you how heavy it would feel to succeed at things that never touched your soul. To wake up every day under the pressure of goals that sparkle for others and suffocate you. You wonder if something's wrong with you, why you don't feel motivated, why ambition feels more like a trap than a fire. But what if it's not a flaw? What if it's clarity? You're not broken, you're misaligned. There's an ache that grows when your soul knows it was meant for something else, something quieter, something truer. But your days are filled chasing someone else's definition of a good life. You keep comparing your silence to their celebration, your confusion to their confidence, but you don't see the scripts they're following either. How many of them are performing too, afraid to step off the path, afraid to feel that same emptiness? This is the existential dissonance, the clash between the myth you were sold and the life that would actually nourish you. You think you're lazy for not pushing harder. But maybe you're not resisting work. Maybe you're resisting a lie. You keep blaming your willpower, the voice says, but maybe it's your soul rejecting the script. That's not failure. That's a beginning that doesn't start with goals or plans, but with the courage to admit, I don't want this. I never did. You stay busy. You plan. You dream in spreadsheets and countdowns. There's always a new idea, a new milestone, a new version of yourself waiting on the other side of achievement. But if you stop, if you really stop, there's nothing there. Just silence, a familiar void. And it terrifies you, so you keep moving, not because you're full of purpose, but because stopping would mean listening. Listening to the emptiness you've spent years covering in to-do lists and productivity rituals. They told you purpose would come from setting goals, that success would silence the doubt. But no matter how much you chase, the hunger returns. You're not lazy, you're starved. Starved for meaning. Starved for something that doesn't feel like a distraction dressed up as discipline. Your obsession with being productive is not a sign of strength. It's a disguise, a way to keep the inner collapse from being heard. This is what psychology calls the absence of intrinsic motivation, the quiet death of the soul's voice under the noise of external validation. You wake up each day to run a race, but the finish line belongs to someone else. And no matter how fast you go, you're always behind, because you're not chasing your truth, you're escaping your disconnection. There's a difference between building a future and using the future to avoid your present. You don't need another plan. You need to feel what you've been running from. You need to remember what it's like to be moved by something that doesn't require applause or likes or deadlines. The world worships efficiency, but your soul, it waits quietly until you stop mistaking noise for direction, until you realize that what you're chasing isn't a dream. It's just a distraction from the silence you were never taught to embrace. Before you knew what you valued, someone told you what mattered. Before you learned to listen inward, you were trained to perform. Smile when praised, apologize when too loud, be useful, be admired, be manageable. They called it love. They called it guidance. But what it really was the beginning of forgetting yourself. You didn't choose your first dreams. They were planted, subtly, in the way your achievements were celebrated more than your questions, in the way your silence was safer than your truth. And so you adapted. You learned which parts of you were allowed to exist. You became good at it, so good that you forgot it was a performance. This is the theft that never leaves a trace. The one that happens in childhood, quietly, behind smiles and expectations. Jung called it the birth of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted in a world that fears what it cannot control. But the cost is heavy, because while the mask smiles, the soul waits, trapped, reduced to a whisper inside your own life. You hear a voice that calls you lazy, that says you should be doing more, being more, fixing yourself faster. But stop and ask, whose voice is that? The one that criticizes, the one that accuses, the one that never forgives your tiredness. It might belong to someone who never truly saw you, someone who projected their own wounds onto your silence, someone who demanded obedience when you needed understanding. That voice is not your own, and yet it guides you. You live trying to please a phantom, and every time you hesitate, every time you rest, every time you doubt the path, that ghost scolds you. Not because you're wrong, but because you're waking up. Waking up is dangerous to inherited roles. Remembering yourself threatens the system that fed on your compliance, but there's something beautiful and painful in this moment. You're not lost, you're shedding, and what feels like laziness may be your first act of resistance, the slow, quiet revolution of no longer running from the truth that was buried beneath other people's dreams. There's a particular confusion that haunts the modern soul, the feeling of being stuck inside a life you chose. You look around and there are no cages, no one is forcing you. The job, the projects, even the relationships were decisions you made. And still, you can't move, you can't begin, or worse, you begin and quickly burn out. So you blame your focus, your discipline. You think there's something wrong with your willpower. But what if the problem isn't how you're moving, but where you started? Some decisions aren't born from freedom. They're born from fear, from the hunger to feel worthy, from the need to finally be enough, from the belief that if you just achieve this one thing, the emptiness will go quiet. And the body knows. It knows the difference between a path that's aligned and a performance stitched together from survival. It knows when you're lying, especially to yourself. That's why you feel tired before you begin, why procrastination haunts even the goals that once excited you, because underneath that excitement was anxiety, pressure, a quiet desperation to be loved, to be safe, to be seen. But desire born from fear doesn't liberate, it enslaves. You didn't fail to start, you started from the wrong place, and now your soul resists, not because it's lazy, but because it refuses to invest energy in a life that doesn't carry its signature. There is a grief here, hidden beneath your hesitation, the grief of realizing how many of your choices were actually just conditioned responses, how many of your dreams were compromises wrapped in ambition. But there's power in that grief, because once you see it, you can stop pretending. You can begin again, not from panic, but from presence. Not to be worthy, but to be real. You spend hours imagining the future version of yourself, the stronger one, the focused one, the one who finally wakes up early, follows through, smiles without effort. That version becomes your anchor, your hope, but also your escape. You don't believe in them, not really. You just need them to exist, so you don't have to sit with what you've become. It's not ambition, it's anesthesia. You romanticize your potential not to grow, but to avoid, to delay the ache of facing who you are when no one is watching, to avoid the question that always returns when the noise fades. What if I never become that person? Philosophers speak of temporal dissociation, the tendency to flee the discomfort of now by hiding in the imagined future. But it's not just theory. It's how so many live, addicted to later, terrified of now. You chase progress, but only because presence feels unbearable. And still, the body knows. It feels the dissonance. It senses that the future you keep projecting is not a destination. It's a mask, a well-lit hallway that keeps you from opening the door to the present room. You don't chase your future. You hide behind it, because becoming is safer than being. Dreaming is cleaner than feeling. Fantasizing about transformation is easier than sitting in the ruin of the moment and asking, what part of me have I abandoned to survive this far? You are not lazy. You are scared. Not of failure, but of finally seeing yourself without the filter of potential, without the shield of the future. But maybe, just maybe, presence is where you begin again. Not as the person you promised to become, but as the one you forgot you already were. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You say it without thinking now. I'm lazy. I'm inconsistent. I never finish what I start. As if these were facts, as if they were carved into your skin, but they weren't born with you. They were given. Each label handed down like a mirror, cracked and fogged, showing only the parts of you someone else couldn't handle. You internalized their disappointment, their frustration, their fear, and you turned it into identity, not because it was true, but because it was safer to believe them than to risk being alone in your own truth. The standards you still measure yourself by, they were never yours. They belonged to people who needed you to be easy, to be impressive, to be silent, to be anything but complicated and real. So you learned to adapt, to shrink, to strive. You learned to earn affection through performance, to equate love with obedience, and every time you didn't meet their imaginary bar, the whip of shame cracked inside you. Now you carry their voices as if they were your own, the critic that never rests, the guilt that arrives even when you're still, the sense that no matter how much you do, it's never enough. But the truth is brutal and liberating. You're not underachieving. You're trying to become lovable in a language that cost you your voice. You were never lazy. You were unheard. And in the silence that followed, you built a self around the fragments that survived. This is not about blaming them. It's about seeing clearly, about understanding how deeply love can be confused with approval, and how dangerous that confusion becomes when internalized. You are not broken. You are layered, shaped by histories that were not yours to carry but carried anyway. And the work now is not to fix, but to unlearn, not to improve, but to remember who you were before the names, before the masks, before love became something to earn. There's a different kind of energy that moves through you when you want something deeply, not out of fear, not out of duty, but because it sings your name from the inside. It doesn't exhaust, it ignites. You don't need reminders. You don't need morning rituals. You don't need motivation hacks. You just move, not because you're pushing yourself, but because something real is pulling you. Laziness doesn't exist here, because when the desire is true, it doesn't require performance. It doesn't negotiate with your worth. It burns, silently, consistently, from a place deeper than ambition, from the core. But most people never feel this. Not because they don't have dreams, but because they were taught to chase what would be accepted, not what would be authentic. So they run in circles, high-functioning, hyper-planning, empty. True desire doesn't live in the mind. It lives in the body. It speaks in the language of resonance. You feel it in your spine. In the quiet yes, your soul whispers before your thoughts can interrupt. Jung called it the integration of the self, that moment when your inner world stops clashing with your outer choices, when what you do is no longer a mask, but a mirror. You've spent years trying to force yourself into alignment, but alignment is not forced. It's revealed when the pretending ends. So maybe the beginning isn't about doing more. Maybe it starts with listening, writing down, with honesty, what you would do if no one ever had to see it. No audience, no applause, no judgment, just you and the truth you've been waiting to remember. There's a kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. It's not physical, it's not even emotional, it's existential. The deep fatigue of spending years acting like someone you never truly were. You smile when expected, you nod when required, you pursue the image they applauded, hoping that one day it might finally feel like yours. But the applause always fades, and you're left with the echo, a life that looks good on paper, but feels like slow suffocation. You call it burnout, but what if it's something deeper? What if the stage is collapsing? What if the script is ending? Not because you failed, but because your soul is done performing. You've been surviving through adaptation, through excellence, through mimicry. But adaptation has a price. It costs you your identity. And now, the mask is heavy. The lines feel false. The audience no longer matters. This is not weakness. This is revelation. You're not tired of doing. You're tired of doing everything for someone you never were. And yes, it hurts. To admit how much time was spent on becoming digestible, to realize how many of your strengths were reactions, not reflections. But beneath the grief, there's clarity. Beneath the rubble of the persona, there's a pulse, faint but real. You're not collapsing, you're shedding. And what looks like defeat may be the most honest beginning of your life, not the curated one, not the admired one, the real one, quiet, unpolished, finally breathing. For so long, you thought healing meant becoming someone new, more disciplined, more productive, more spiritual, more everything. But what if it's not about becoming? What if the real work is in the unbecoming? Unbecoming the mask, the roles, the desperate attempts to be acceptable. Unbecoming the voice in your head that was never yours to begin with, the critic you inherited, the shame you swallowed, the identity built not from essence, but from fear. Carl Jung wrote that the self does not emerge through performance. It emerges when the mask is dropped. When you stop reaching outward and begin listening inward. When you stop asking, "Who should I be?" and start remembering who you were before the pretending began. Laziness is not your disease. It's your symptom. It's your body's protest, your spirit's exhaustion, the quiet scream of a soul that can no longer carry the weight of the performance. You're not failing, you're realigning, you're not falling behind, you're falling back into yourself. Schopenhauer said, A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. And maybe that's the truth you've been avoiding, that your will was hijacked by expectations that never belonged in your chest. So now, burn the map they handed you. Every instruction, every label, every promise tied to your silence. Then sit still, not to wait, but to remember. Let the direction come from the silence. Let the next chapter begin not with a task, but with a breath. You are not lazy. You're just done living a lie. And yes, there is still time to remember who you were before the pretending began.